Good day. This is Trudy Heller. I have the honor of being the moderator of the very first webinar of the U.S. Green Chamber of Commerce. And our speaker today is Mitch Hedlund. Now, Mitch is one of those people the world needs more of. She's taken her 20 years of experience in marketing, communications, and branding, and is putting it to work for the green economy. In 2010, it started Recycle Across America, Recycle Across the World, and innovated a world-changing fix to one of the major barriers to recycling. She's here to tell us about her solution, which has been called one of the most important environmental fixes taking root today. Mitch.
Trudy, thank you so much. And attendees of the first webinar for the U.S. Green Chamber of Commerce, welcome. And I'm honored to be the first. Always nice to break ground. First of all, we're incredibly proud of what the U.S. Green Chamber of Commerce, Michelle Thatcher and her team, and Trudy are doing, and the services and the resources and the vision that they bring and collaborate on with businesses that are trying to advance their sustainability efforts. So kudos to everyone. I'm very honored to be part of this movement. And as Trudy shared with you, my background is communications, branding, marketing. I've been in that field of work for many, many years, and having had the opportunity to look at recycling objectively, not only from my own perspective, but from what's happening in society at public area recycling bins within businesses and public spaces, I realized that recycling was in desperate need, in a way, to be rebranded. So in this webinar, I'm going to just walk through, and we'll do this rather quickly, we'll walk through some visuals that help communicate the story to you. I'm going to start off with sharing a little bit of history that has nothing to do with recycling, but it does have something to do with all of our lives, where things have gone with technology, what's happened with our economy, what's happened with safety, what's happened with nutrition, and just walk through some experiences in history that dramatically changed the way that certain industries operate. And the first, as you can see, again, has nothing to do with recycling, but hopefully you'll start to see a theme here. This is actually a machine that helps administer anesthesia. And even in my lifetime, in my childhood, I remember people being incredibly fearful of going into surgery. And it wasn't so much because of the operation as it was the fear of going under anesthesia. And at that time, there was a very high percentage of deaths related to overdosing going under anesthesia. In fact, a father who was a doctor ended up losing his daughter during a very routine wisdom tooth extraction, and she died. And he was so disturbed by that that he really wanted to investigate what caused the death and dig a little bit deeper. And what he learned with some of the equipment, depending on the manufacturer, if you turn the dial, one dial to the left on one piece of equipment, it would decrease the amount of anesthetics that were administered to the patient. But on other equipment by other manufacturers, if you turn the dial to the left, it would increase the amount of anesthetics administered to a patient. And so you can see that confusion could cause problems depending on which machine anesthesiologist was working with. There could be significant changes in how things were administered if he or she wasn't paying attention. Well, that doctor went to great lengths, the doctor who had lost his daughter, trying to get the industry and the manufacturers of this equipment to agree to standardize the dials. And remarkably, the manufacturers really didn't want to give up their own systems, but eventually they did, and they all agreed that these things should be standardized. That simple solution that almost seems impossible to imagine anybody disagreeing with reduced the amount of overdose fatalities during surgery 600%. And as you can imagine, that changed all sorts of economics, legal issues, not to mention mortality rates related to surgery, and just the psychological issues that people would have with going into surgery. Here's another example. I think we all take it for granted. I think up until hearing the story, I thought that time was always standardized since the beginning of time. But as late as 1883 in the US, there were literally thousands of different times used from one town to the next at any given moment from coast to coast. And for an industry such as the railroad industry, traveling between city to city or town to town or coast to coast, literally the railroad companies would have to deal with hundreds, sometimes thousands of different times, including just going between Boston and New York involved 6 to 9 different time differences. So you can imagine what that did with the industry and how ineffective that was in people boarding planes, in the distribution of goods, in meeting up with other trains. I mean, it really just created havoc economically and through efficiencies. And one gentleman who was very much involved with the train industry took it upon himself to try to ask different mayors, different communities across the country to agree to a standardized time system. And once again, there was huge resistance. Nobody wanted to give up their own times. And times were really related to however each town or each community read the sun in the sky. That's how they determined the time in their locale. And nobody wanted to give that up. And the train professional who was trying to standardize time across the country for his industry really had to go to great lengths, years worth actually, of trying to convince people to make this change and what it could do for the economy, for different industries and so forth. And in 1883, he accomplished his goal, and standardized time zones were brought into the U.S. And it is, as you know it right now. That simple change dramatically changed not only the industry of travel with trains, but it also created a launch pad for all sorts of things that we take for granted today, including phones, including satellite systems, including technology, including transport of planes. Everything you can imagine is actually affected by time. And without standardized time, there would be really none of that. So it's a simple solution that dramatically kind of exploded not only one industry, but many industries to come. On a very simple level, I want to share this analogy as well, this example. In 1915, there was a nonprofit that was started in Michigan to propose a standardized stop sign. Even at that time, they were recognizing that travel at intersections by any form of transportation was really threatening, because there was no standardized way of communicating what people should do at those intersections. Within 7 years, even with the lack of communication that we have now, within 7 years, the standardized stop sign was widely adopted throughout the U.S. and soon became widely adopted throughout most countries in the world. But it's really interesting because it wasn't until 40 years later that the U.S. federal government deemed the standardized stop sign that was already established as indeed a standardized stop sign. And I point that out because it's not always the government that leads change. In fact, sometimes they're the last to come to the table. So it's sometimes NGOs or industries that advance and provide solutions, and the government hopefully supports them at some point. That simple standardized stop sign, of course, changed human behavior dramatically as transportation continued to increase. Another standardization that we all have come to know and love is the nutritional facts on food packaging. And that simple standardization of providing nutritional information on every form of food that's sold in stores dramatically changed the way consumers purchase food, health decisions that they make, how food is manufactured, how food is marketed, all sorts of things dramatically changed with that simple standardization. So now I want to talk about recycling, and I can't see your hands. In fact, I have to stop for a second and hope that everybody is actually on this call and able to hear. I'm going to stop for just a moment and ask, I don't know if you have the ability to type in on your screen whether you're on and can hear properly, but if you can't, please let us know by typing in something in the communicator on the side of your screen. But I'm going to move through, assuming that you are on the call and that you are able to see this and hear it as well. So the question that I would have for you, although you're all on mute, is how many of you have stood at a recycling bin, whether it's at the airport, your place of work, your place of worship, your children's school, maybe even your home, and been confused by what you should be putting in that bin? Most likely, I'm assuming that all of your hands have gone up. Every time I present that question to anyone, instantly the hands go up and people nod their head. And people are very confused at recycling bins, specifically in public areas. And as a result of that, actually because of this, what you see on your screen right now, this is the visual and how recycling is presented to the general public. All of us are miners of one of the most important types of commodities ever in history. These are commodities that are highly valuable if they're recycled properly, and they are desperately needed in order to sustain on this planet, the reuse of materials. So it's really impactful that we recycle, but this is the way that it's presented to us, the miners, the general public, that are the most critical element of recycling. So as a result of the confusion at the bin, which we've all experienced, this is what's happening inside the bin. Bins in every location are highly contaminated. Every day there are literally hundreds of millions of tons of things that don't belong in the recycling bin in the recycling bin. And there are hundreds of millions of tons of things that do belong in the recycling bin going into the trash can. And as you can imagine, that dramatically changes the economics of processing recycling. This article on the screen is not that long ago. It's talking about a recycling processor in Washington State, which is considered one of the more progressive states in the Union. This article talks about how 550 tons of trash, garbage, dirty diapers, half-eaten hot dogs, left shoes, hypodermic needles, things that clearly do not belong in the recycling bin, 550 tons of those bad materials are in the recycling system every day at this one facility. It's a serious problem. It's such a problem that the CEO of Waste Management a few months ago was basically blasted for being at a conference and saying that recycling wasn't profitable. He came back to explain himself through a blog and said, since contamination is a barrier to recycling greater amounts of material, this is why recycling has not been profitable, and we need to get the public to recycle right. It's an enormous problem. It's bigger than the U.S. About a year and a half ago, some of you might be aware of this, some of you may not, but China purchases a high volume of our recycling. They bring our Barbie dolls and our flat screen TVs on their big cargo ships, and when the ships are empty, they buy our recycling by the ton and they ship it back. They fill their ballasts and they take their ships back with our recycling. Unfortunately, what they're purchasing by the ton sometimes is 35% to 60% garbage, things that don't belong in there, that they paid for by the weight. And so they actually enforced a green fence policy about a year and a half ago, slowing down the amount of purchases of recycling because it was so highly contaminated with trash. And that, unfortunately, is creating a slippery slope in the recycling market here in the U.S. If we go one step farther to see what's happening in the system, we learn that manufacturers are really between a rock and a hard place. A lot of manufacturers, including Best Buy, who creates private packaging, private label goods, electronics. This is a quote from their global packaging manager. So they had shareholders that applied tremendous pressure to the board of directors to start using recycled material in their packaging. And when the board of directors then went to the CEO and the leadership of the company went to the global packaging manager and said, "This, we're getting pressure from our shareholders to start using more sustainable packaging, including using recycled content." So the global packaging manager goes and he researches what the options are and finds out to get quality material that he can actually commit to using for their packaging. The price now, because they have to clean out the dirty diapers, they have to clean out that contamination, the price now is higher than often virgin materials. And as a result of that, a lot of companies can't make the switch. So they continue to deplete virgin materials rapidly. So this is a bad math situation. Human population by 2025 is going to be over 8 billion. I find this really interesting. I don't feel incredibly old, but when I was born, there were only half the amount of people on this planet that there are now. If I live to be 100, there will be 4 times as many people as there are on this planet. According to the World Watch Institute and the trajectory that we are currently on, worldwide waste will double by 2025. And worldwide waste is not just waste. It's not one-dimensional that magically appears. If worldwide waste doubles and we're not using recycled content to manufacture that waste, then so will the use of finite natural resources. The amount of use of those materials will also double by 2025, and so will the environmental damage that comes from not recycling and using virgin materials. Every day, or excuse me, not every day, every year in the world, there's about 8 million metric tons of waste going into oceans, waterways, and the bellies of sea life. Just to put that in perspective, because that's a big number to digest, that's 5 full bags stacked on every linear foot of coastline in the world each year. That's how much material is going into the oceans every year. So as you can imagine, if we think that the oceans and sea life are important to us and our existence on this planet, that's highly threatening. But what's really interesting is 7 out of the 10 of the most common materials found in the oceans are fully recyclable. And these photos that you see are not from a third world country. I think it's really interesting, and I think it's really important to mention that this is not something that's happening in undeveloped countries. This, in fact, in the most developed countries, including the US, that is where most of this waste is coming from. Because of the general public's confusion at the bin, the recycling levels in the US are at about 35%. They've been there for many years, and they're starting to slip. And that has something to do with the contamination, quite a bit to do with the contamination and the green fence policy. So what we recognize as just a common rule of recycling, that after people eat, drink, and use a product, what they do in the next moment is really critical for all of us. It's critical for manufacturers, and it's critical for all of us to exist on this planet. But if it looks like this, if recycling, and this is just a tiny snapshot of what recycling current looks like, if it looks this confusing, they won't do it right. This is what we've learned in the last 30 years. So we started an organization called Recycle Across America to introduce a ridiculously simple solution that has a profound impact and a systemic impact on not only human behavior at the bin, but what that means for manufacturers, what that means for the cost of processing recycling, what that means for CO2 levels. It really is this exponential impact from a very, very, very rudimentary solution. And the standardized labels come in, as you can imagine, many different forms because not one recycling label fits all in the US. What you recycle in your building might be different than what your neighbors require to recycle in their building if they have a different hauler. So we had to create a label that accommodates each one of those scenarios. The standardized labels can be created in many different shapes, but always maintaining the standardized elements. They're very photocentric, they're color-coded, very simple language, and there was a huge mythology that went into that process of developing these. In addition to the traditional recycled materials, we also have standardized labels for companies and organizations that are trying to reach zero waste, companies that are trying to also recycle industrial and construction materials. So companies such as Procter & Gamble, Walt Disney World, Hallmark, Veralia, many companies now are starting to use these standardized labels as well on the back side of their businesses. The standardized labels work. We were really excited not only to see that there's just this viral use of them, that organically, by word of mouth, so many major global brands are starting to use the labels. That was hugely exciting for us to witness. But what was even more exciting for us to hear is that the standardized labels are working. Most often, the labels are generating 50 to 100% increases in recycling levels and significant decreases in contamination. We've had media investigation. As Trudy mentioned, the New York Times took painstaking amounts of time in interviewing different organizations that are using the labels, and they also really started to learn the systemic impact of this far beyond just recycling, and they deemed it one of the most important environmental fixes taking root today. We've had a national focus group. Rubbermaid actually conducted a randomized focus group with 1,000 consumers from across the U.S. This was not that long ago. I think Rubbermaid was really looking forward to having their new labeling system win. But what they learned was the standardized labels won in all categories that it was tested. It was more appealing, more comprehensive, more effective, and subsequently generated better results than their labels, their old labels, and other labels that they put to the test. Custodial services, I think this is something, if you have a business and you don't own the building, or you own the building, or one way or the other, whether you have a custodial service operating and cleaning within your building, this is important to mention. Custodial service and property management companies often are challenged with the fact that their cleaning crews, which sometimes don't even speak or read English, are going from one building to another, and one office space, even within one building, going from one floor or one office space to the other, and seeing a different bin, different labeling system, often without photos. They're not trained to recognize a labeling system because there is no consistency within that building or within their buildings that they have to operate in. And therefore, and we've all seen it, the custodial service comes, grabs the recycling, and throws it in the trash. So it becomes a very wasted effort by the company, by the business, to even offer recycling to their employees when at night the cleaning service comes in and throws it all in the dumpster for the garbage and landfill anyway. So there's a company, Marsden, which is the largest privately held custodial service company in the U.S., that started using our labels. The president said their cleaning staff speaks over 78 languages, and with the standardized labels, they now have a clear and consistent labeling tool to train their staff on what to do. So they started providing the standardized labels to their accounts and saw dramatic increases. And here are some other testimonials. I won't go through those, but these are out of users that are now using the standardized labels that have done pilot programs and seen tremendous increases. I do want to give you one example, however, that's real time and kind of easy to get your mind around. Sony this year hosted the PGA tournament in Honolulu. I think they've done it for the last 5 years or so. The year before, in 2014, they also hosted the PGA tournament in Honolulu, and they had recycling that year and trash, of course, and they put some type of labeling system on those bins. This year, in 2015, they used the standardized labels on all of their bins. They had the same amount of bins. They had the same amount of attendees, 55,000 for a 3-day event. And this year, they collected 4 times more glass bottles, 6 times more plastic bottles, and 14 times more aluminum cans. So if in 2014 they collected 100,000 aluminum cans, this year, because of the standardized labels, they collected 1.4 million aluminum cans. And if the math is correct, which sometimes a pound of aluminum does generate 81 cents in a very good market, that would be about $176,000 more aluminum cans this year over last year for that 3-day event. using the standardized labels. We also have been globally vetted. A standardized, society-wide standardized labeling system has not been done ever before globally, and in most countries it's never been done before. And so we've been vetted by Ashoka and ended up winning a Global Fellowship Award, and they have deemed this a world-changing solution. Here are just a few brands of some of the great leaders that have started to use the standardized labels organically. Again, we've only called on one company in the history of starting Recycle Across America. The others have just kind of come to us all on their own. One school district has used the standardized labels, San Diego Unified, that I'm sharing with you, and within the first year they anticipated, and I believe they reached this, $200,000 landfill hauling fee savings within 1 year because they use the standardized labels. The recycling levels went up so dramatically that they were able to cut back on their landfill hauling fees and downsize the amount of the size of their dumpsters. So how do we pollinate this solution? Because it has such a profound impact. Working with the groups like U.S. Green Chamber of Commerce is huge, and Michelle Thatcher's vision on this is enormous. That's a fabulous way for us to pollinate this solution. In addition to great partnerships like that, and we have many of them now, we also have started a celebrity campaign. We now have over 50 celebrities on board. We piloted our celebrity campaign, which is called Let's Recycle Right, last year, and it has had a dramatic impact. We kind of guessed how much media attention we ended up getting on it, and we thought it was about $4 million altogether, and it ended up being closer to $20 million worth of donated ad space. The outcome of the campaign is really to unify and engage and empower society to learn to recycle right. Simply saying that to them is not enough when it's so confusing. So it's about recycling right, but also introducing the standardized labeling system. In addition to that, we're partnering with other nonprofits that have solutions that can help recycling, including the Sustainable Packaging Coalition that's come up with the How to Recycle label for packaging. So we're going to start introducing that into the celebrity campaign as well. And the idea is not only to help society learn to recycle right as they start seeing some of these tools, labeling tools, but also to increase the amount of companies that are starting to recycle in the U.S. and encouraging them to use the standardized labels as they start their programs. And the next step after this campaign continues is to help consumers then understand which products have been made with recycled material, so they can start to help close the loop. This is just an example of some of the full-page print ads that we created for our Let's Recycle Right campaign. Some of the billboards that were out last year, and they're coming out again this year, and it ended up being $13 million in billboards. We thought it was about $3 million, but it was actually about $13 million, so we were incredibly proud of that. The ad campaign worked. It's because of our Let's Recycle Right campaign that Bank of America learned about the standardized labels in a magazine, and as a result of that, they now have rolled out they're in the process actually of rolling out the standardized labels in all 5,000 locations throughout the U.S. And in addition to that, Bank of America, Whole Foods, Kiehl's, Sony, and many others are now donating standardized labels to K-12 schools throughout the U.S. To date, we have about 350,000 standardized labels that have been given to schools, including San Diego schools, across the U.S. So we've got Washington, D.C. public schools, Scottsdale, Houston. It's just been a remarkable, remarkable program. And this is why we do it for schools. This is one of the most progressive schools in Orlando, and walking through the entire school and all the classrooms, you cannot tell a recycling bin from a trash can. The contents of each look identical, and they have no labels. And keep in mind, this is the most progressive school that there is in this particular Orlando school district, OCPS. So they just now are applying the standardized labels thanks to Bank of America. All the schools in Honolulu, and now all the schools in Oahu, and now all the schools in Hawaii are starting to roll out the standardized labels throughout the entire state of Hawaii, which is incredibly impactful. They're given to the schools by companies such as Sony, but on top of it, it's a perfect example of island living and island issues with waste in the water that we're addressing with this solution. And the kids love the labels. They're so passionate about recycling in general, and they get it. They understand the labels and the impact of them. By the end of this year, we have a goal to have 1 million standardized labels donated to U.S. schools by the end of 2015 through corporate and business donors. And ultimately, if we don't fix this, then really how will we ever solve this issue and all the other issues that we're dealing with? A little earlier, I had said that it was a slippery slope when we talked about the green fence issue with China and the quote a few months ago from the CEO of Waste Management. Well, 2 weeks ago, this is the most recent quote from the CEO of Waste Management. Recycling is in a crisis. It isn't profitable, and we have to shut down recycling plants. Unless we can work out a way where recycling is profitable over the long term, there's not going to be recycling. That is incredibly frightening to hear from the leading hauler in the U.S. And I think it's a call to action to really come together as a society and make it easy for the general public to learn to recycle right. Make it easy for them to learn to recycle properly. And I think we have that responsibility as businesses to not only recycle, but make sure that we're presenting it in a way where it's part of a society-wide movement. We're ready it's time for another standardization to solve confusion. It's time for recycling to be a highly productive, effective, efficient, and highly economically valuable industry, along with manufacturing using recycled content. It needs to become the new norm, and if we want to start addressing some of these global environmental issues. So Kristen Bell here is saying, so what's on your bin? And ultimately, again, know the benefits. Financially, there are huge benefits for your organization. There are usually tax reductions for increasing recycling or offering recycling, and for increasing recycling, and we can provide some of that information for you. There's huge reputation benefits internally and externally by employees, stakeholders, and customers. They care about these issues. They want to see recycling bins at your storefront behind the scenes. They want to see that they're clearly labeled. And it helps reduce the cost in the future of products that you want to purchase that contain recycled materials. But if you are spending money on recycling and you're not doing it properly, I hate to say this, you are wasting your money, because if it's not done well, most often it's going to the landfill if it's so highly contaminated. If your business is a manufacturer of products, you have another reason to get involved in this solution, because you need your materials back at a cost point that is competitive and far more competitive than virgin materials, and at a quality where you know you're not compromising your packaging or your manufacturing. And of course, the third, and I'd like to say this is the most important, but everybody's in business for business, and I get that. But what good is business if our environmental welfare has completely collapsed? So you have 3 very strong reasons to not only recycle, but make it easy for your employees, your customers, your vendors, your visitors to recycle right at your property. And I believe that this is the future. We are going to say in 5 to 7 years from now, remember when recycling was confusing. That is our nonprofit organization's goal, is to be able to say that with great partners such as the U.S. Green Chamber of Commerce and other great partners that we're working with, and with great companies such as yours. We really do believe that we will be like the stop sign situation, the anesthesiologist machine situation, the clock situation, where it was so confusing before, but a simple solution dramatically changed that, and it launched effective economics. And that's it. I hope I stayed within my time. I hope I didn't speak too fast. But again, thank you so much for allowing me to present and to share this story. And we hope that you will consider joining the Let's Recycle Right campaign and start using the standardized labels in your operations. And if you have any questions, feel free to give me a call again or send me an email. That would be better. Again, we are a 501c3 nonprofit. You can go to our website, recycleacrossamerica.org, and our email address is Mitch, M-I-T-C-H, at recycleacrossamerica.org for more information.
Thank you so much, Mitch, for this inspiring, eye-opening, and important story. We're a little bit over time, so I think you've answered the most important question, which is how people can follow up and get the labels for themselves. So I think we should end now, and thank you again.
Thank you very much.